Morning, everybody. Welcome to meeting 24 of the Community Development and Recreation Committee, and welcome to members of the committee and other members of council in attendance today. Well, maybe they'll come eventually. And of course, members of the public. If we could keep it down in the room, please. Thank you. For those in the room with us, the screen at the back of the room provides real-time updates concerning where we are in the agenda and what's coming up next. You can follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, smartphone at toronto.ca/council. At 12:30 today, I'm hoping all committee members will make it to our City Hall launch of the calendar featuring photos taken by those affected by homelessness, the My Toronto photo exhibit, and 2018 calendar launch. All members of committee were sent an invitation and a backgrounder on this exciting project. The calendar has been circulating for some weeks, but we're going to do Made at City Hall launch at 12:30, just outside the door here. I hope you can all spare a few minutes and join us. Declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Hearing none. Motion to confirm the minutes of October 23rd, 2017. Councillor Cressy, all those in favor? It's carried. So we have a list of speakers. Why don't we go through the agenda? We have a couple of requests to amend the agenda. Item number 1, 24.1, repeal of Municipal Code, Chapter 387 in response to amendments to the Ontario Fire Code. I knew Councillor Mihevik would move that one. All those in favor? That is carried. Item number 2, amendment to contract number, gosh, do I have to read this whole thing out? 4701967 for provision of cardiac monitor defibrillator.
I'd like to hold that, Mr. Chair.
You're going to hold that?
Yes.
All righty. Okay, that's being held by Councillor Ford. Number 3, community recreation 2018-2020 growth plan. There are deputations, so we will hold that one. Item number 4, for public benefit, whole of government framework to guide City of Toronto relationships with the community-based not-for-profit sector. That is being held for deputations. Number 5, 2017 allocations recommendations for local champions and organizational mentor pilot programs. That is also being held for deputations. Item number 6, Community Investment Fund Identity and Impact Grant allocation. You'd be happy to move that. Councillor Cressy is moving that. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item number 7, that is being held for deputations. Now we have a new item, which is not ready yet. So, Councillor Wong Tam, when that motion is ready, we'd be happy to amend the agenda and introduce it onto the floor.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I do have a quick question on item number 2 of the agenda. If it's not a long item for other members of the committee, if I could be permitted just to ask a quick question. And
yeah, no, I didn't mean to scare you off by looking astonished by holding it. So you're free to, if you feel it'll be quick, with the wish of committee, I'd be happy to deal with it right now.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, questions for staff? Item number 2, amendment to contract number for the provision of cardiac monitor defibrillators.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff, it shouldn't be too long. I see that an RFP was released back in 2014 when this contract was established. And my quick question is, why did we not go out for another RFP and just extend the contract here?
Through the chair, the contract at that time in terms of the defibrillators was specific. It was at that point in time there was there was new monitors on the market, so we had to go through that process of procurement. It was a long-term contract, and you can see from the report that it talked about annual renew through the operating process. So that's the process that we followed, and that's what I believe that was recommended at that time.
Just one follow-up question. So if we are extending this contract, when would we go back out to market if for renewal of a contract?
I believe it's it's a 9-year contract, renewed every year for 9 years, and I think it's in 20. What's the date on that? I can get that date for you.
Did
Yeah,
you get
we
your
can get back to you.
answer?
That's fine.
I'm not sure. It sounded like an answer, non-answer, but did you get your answer?
I can speak to staff offline. I'm happy.
Yeah, okay. All right. Any other questions for staff on this one? Speakers? No? Motion to move the recommendations. Councillor Cressy, all those in favor? It's carried. So, with the will of the committee, we have a lot of deputations for item 7. Now, we could follow the agenda and get to it eventually. There's also been a request to do item number 3 at the top of the agenda because of urgent matters at PFR that staff have to run to. So my suggestion would be let's do item 3 first and then 7, so we don't have the large number of deputants sitting here for hours on end. So we have the will of the committee to go that route. Great. So number 3, Community Recreation 2018-2020 Growth Plan and Waitlist Management. We have speakers. Asasha McCreath. Asasha McCreath. Tim McGuire. Oh, there he is. Great, thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Asasha McCreath. I'm here from Toronto, CUPE Local 79 from Recreation. I'm here to speak about the waitlist issue we've been happening. And I've been in programs from now about 4 years old. Like, my mother had this process of having to wake up 2 hours early and commute all the way to the location to register me for these programs. Because back then they never had the privilege of having online and computers, so they had to either go in person or call on the phone. But even back then, there was a little issue with the wait list because if you call on the phone, the luck of you getting through is like 0 to none. So your best luck for all of this is to go in person. So every time she would go, let's say for summer camps, because I was young, it would take 2 hours to get there. So she'd leave an extra 3 hours early. But no matter what, if she leaves early, she'd always be guaranteed to get into the program. So from I was 4 years old, I've been in summer camp programs, I've been into preschool programs. I basically grew up in recreation, and I love the experience there. You're able to learn fine motor skills, you're able to learn communication skills, all the stuff you cannot learn at home or just at school. So as the years went by, I was able to volunteer, got to meet all the staff and faculties in the location, and then I started to get employed when I was about 16. So then I was able to give back to the community and like work in the program. But then as the years went by, I had parents come up to me about issues they're experiencing getting into the programs. For example, I teach a dance programs that happen throughout the week. The wait list used to be about 10 people, so the parents wouldn't really argue, but as that list grew, parents would come to me and be like, my child has been registered in this program for about a year, and all of a sudden I'm getting there early in the morning, I'm calling early in the morning, and once I used to get through and now it's not possible. They've been calling and coming in, and no matter what we do to accommodate them, it wouldn't be enough for some of the parents. Especially for summer camp, I see that problem as well because I had a parent come up to me with 2 children. She had 2 daughters, one with an accommodation and then one child who didn't. So she's like, she used to come in all the time and try to register her child for the programs and got in because she's not able to do as much because one child has the disability. So they're not able to go past their beyonds to try and register her in other programs and like be able to engage with other children. But for this summer camp, she was able to, but unfortunately, she couldn't get in. And she would come in early, she'd talk to the CRP, she would call an extra 3-4 hours early, she'd go all the way to the location by like 3 a.m. in the morning just to have her child into these programs that she can able to talk, grow with other kids, engage with other kids, and nothing would happen. She would complain, write letters, and nothing would happen. So that's the issue I want to see improved on because children who want to get in these programs are able to learn more, accommodate more, able to engage more. and unfortunately it's not happening. As well as summer camp programs I did teach, we have a cooking problem that we would cook about every other week. The children are able to learn how to make a meal, they're able to learn how to use the stove, they're able to use a knife, which is great skills for children now. But lately we've been having a program they registered in, which is pretty good, to get some free supplies so we can cut back and able to save more on that location. But one day we got only yogurt for that problem. And then we told the kids, we had it on our program plan, we're gonna make tacos that day. You know, we get a few vegetables, a few food, the class of 10 can eat. And then we came in that morning and only got yogurt, and then I had to tell the kids, oh, sorry, we can't make tacos today, we only have yogurt. So parents would come back, be like, we had this on the program plan, we had this registered, why is our child not getting that? So that was an issue that we also had there, and I just think the city needs to do more to accommodate for all the children. Toronto is growing, the kids are growing, everything is doubling, we have higher demands, and I feel like the demands are not being met. Especially that I grew up in Iraq, I know how it's like to get in and not get into programs. And to see that parents are doing above and beyond and still can't have that ability to get in and engage with all the programs is really a shock to me, because I've never seen that as much in the past. As well as dance programs I'll teach. Some programs on location can get an extra staff, which is great, so the list can get cut. But then other locations, for example, I teach at Elmbank, they don't have the resources or the extra money in the budget to bring in another staff. So then you have waitlist growing 20, 30, 40, 50, and nowhere to accommodate these children. So I feel like we should really invest into this and invest into it fast, because it is growing. It is multiplying. We don't have the resources to accommodate for all these children who are missing out on all these skills that they can't just get at home. And as well as the safety issue I feel like they're having, because parents do work. Parents have to come back at say 6, 5 o'clock, school's done at 3:30. There's no way for them to come home and pick up their 8, 9, 10-year-old child from school. So if they get into program, let's say after school's at 4.
You're just a little after 5 minutes, if you could wrap up.
Sorry. I'll wrap it up quickly. Just like it's a safety issue, because kids have nowhere to go after school, parents are working. So if we're able to have the programs they can get into, they can be safe and supervised for that time for parents.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? I just have one. We have a plan, a strategy developed by staff in front of us. I don't know whether you've had a chance to read it. It's in our agenda. Do you think this will get us there?
I think it's the start, but I feel like the faster we can put it into agreements, the faster we can approve all of this. So the faster the better, I believe, with this.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions for the deputant? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. McGuire?
Good morning. Tim
Thank you for
McGuire,
coming.
President of CUPE Local 79, representing the frontline workers in recreation and other areas of the city, of course. So the report before you shows that wait lists for recreation programs have grown by 74% over the last 3 years to 198,236. A previous staff report states that if nothing is done, the wait list will grow to 400,000 by 2025. Local 79 is relieved on behalf of frontline workers and residents to see that the report recommends adding 60,000 new spaces and programs over the next 3 years in existing facilities. However, only 10,000 spaces are recommended for 2018. The proposed growth plan is very helpful to stop the stemming further waitlist growth, yet expansion efforts are focused on primary programming, largely introductory classes. Our concern is that this could inadvertently come at the detriment of locally customized programming geared towards equity-seeking communities and vulnerable populations. We have 3 recommendations for the committee and council to consider, and you'll see the rest of this in our briefing note that we put together. 1, that staff be directed to report back through the 2018 budget process on the maximum number of program spaces that can be created in existing facilities in 2018 and the associated costs with a breakdown of types of programs. 2, that staff be directed to report back on measures taken to ensure that the growth plan does not result in reduction in locally customized programs for serving equity-seeking communities and vulnerable populations. And 3, that staff be directed to continue monitoring and report on overall waitlist size as a part of performance indicators in the growth plan. Second one again? Okay. So you'll also notice in our briefing note a chart that shows the rapidly increasing number of recreation visits and flatlining of staff. This can be demonstrated by wait lists that have grown by 74%, as I said, and can be expected to grow to 400,000. The quality of recreational programming is therefore at risk. Consider the fact that although use of recreation facilities have grown by 17% since 2012, staffing has flatlined. And just one more point, you can read the rest. Since last June, the CRC reviewed findings of the Newcomer Youth Recreation Forum, which concluded that the city should improve access to recreation for this population through more responsive programming. So again, the wait lists and the lack of progress or speed of progress in putting in programs puts locally designed programs at risk. One other thing I wanted to mention is the Frontline interviewed in the forum also lamented the divisions, that the division is often canceling programs with low attendance, early cancellation of programs before the date of the program, et cetera, and we think that also endangers program. And finally, anecdotally, you can read the briefing note, as I said. Anecdotally, I was in McGregor Community Center on the weekend, and there was violence training happening for young staff. It's very important to understand that recreation program is about life skills. It's about sports skills, leadership skills, team building skills, all those kinds of things that people take back into their everyday lives and as one gets older and contributes back to the economy and communities. But it's also about violence prevention. We teach young kids not only to have fun, teach other kids, be leaders in teaching kids to have fun and life skills, we also teach them that it's important to have recreation programs to prevent violence. We've had members that have been shot at. We've had members that have moved from communities that they lived in and contributed in because of violence and the gun. It's important to recognize, as I said, it's about life skills, training, but it's also about anti-violence to make sure that our kids are safe, our communities are safe, and not attracted to gangs and gun.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions for the deputant? Councillor Wong-Tam?
Yes, thank you. With respect to the breakdown of program categories according to the waitlist, some of it is very much facilities-oriented, just not having enough physical space to accommodate. And then there are other programs that are very instructional that could probably take place in sort of general open spaces or spaces that are not so infrastructure reliant. Is there a way to prioritize how do we break down the waitlist for CUPE?
I think there is, and I think it's about physical space, but it's also about level of staffing. You need a level of staffing to have programs. And as we noted, our members are saying that programs are often cut short. And yes, it's about jobs and hours for young workers that are providing programming to the city's youth, but it's also about having those workers in place to provide the programs. And yes, you could probably break it down in which ones are directly tied to a center and which ones are more about having the sufficient staffing.
Because I think in the facilities master plan the City Council had just approved, it will take a very long time for us to actually physically build out enough facilities to accommodate new additional recreational programs. And if we were to somehow tier it or at least break it down into two steps as opposed to one monolithic movement to build facilities and then the staff up, it seems to me it would take a long time. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that kind of diving down into it would be helpful because, and actually what we're indicating is looking in the 2018 budget about what programming could be added to existing facilities.
And just my final question through you, Mr. Chair, to our deputant, can you be more specific about your concerns about how the growth plan may not adequately address equity-seeking groups?
Well, I think the role of city staff, both management and some of our members, is to reach out to communities and design programming that suits communities. I think it's important to have that work continue, going out, reaching out into communities. I think the city, we've said this for years, the city could do a lot better job in in marketing its programs that can be offered, and further outreach, continue the outreach, deepen the outreach into communities, and see what programs could be designed for different newcomer communities, for vulnerable populations, as I said earlier. Often this program is about ensuring that kids stay in recreation programs rather than be attracted by gangs. So go out and do the community outreach in various communities and make sure the program can suit those communities. If it's just, I wouldn't want to say superficial, but if it's only primary programming and it's at the expense of more in-depth community-oriented programming, what the community wants, and that's the work of city staff, there's a risk there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wong-Tam. Any other questions for the deputant? No? Okay, thank you very much.
For your time.
Thank you. Sean Maher? No? Okay. Sean Maher? Mahar, sorry. One of these days I'll get it right. Okay, questions for staff. Councillor Mahavik.
Am I on? Oh, yeah, it is.
Yep.
The light here isn't working. I've prepared a motion here, and it is a little different than the recommendation from CUPE 79, and I'm just wondering where to go. Phase 1 recommends 10,000 new spaces for 2018 with a goal of getting to 60,000 new spaces by 2020. And I'd like to, my original thought was to double the number to 20,000 in 2018. The CUPE recommendation, though, is to ask for a report on the number, on how quickly you can grow. How quickly can you grow? Can you give us a sense, is it 20,000 that you can grow in 2018, or do you need some thought to consider perhaps a higher number, perhaps a lower number?
Through you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, you know, we've presented in the report a ramping up of a program over 3 years based on financial constraints, as well as what we know is a program that needs to grow. So I think in honesty, if there were funds available, we could likely phase up in 2018 by 20,000 spaces instead of 10,000, but that would likely be the maximum just from an implementation perspective in 1 year.
Okay, so 20,000 for 2018 is, and then we would ask you to report back on phasing in after that. Maybe the new number could be 70,000, could be 80,000, but you could do 20,000 in 2018 and not more.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much. That's all I have.
Councillor Wong-Tam?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And through you to staff, I want to have a better understanding of the realistic timeline that's been placed before us, because I gather that much of what needs to be done is that we have to build up new facilities, and we know that takes an extraordinary period of time. One is to plan, to do the consultation, to do the physical build-out, and not to mention the fact that you've got to find the financing. So in the absence of facilities being built at the rate that we need to build them, what other measures and initiatives can be explored to be able to reduce the waitlist gap?
Through the chair. So we've identified a number of strategies that we undertake to regularly manage waitlists through administrative policies that we've put in place, such as attendance management, duplicate registration. You know, as the report indicates, we successfully moved 15,000 customers off of waiting lists into active programmings through taking those measures, and we will continue to undertake those steps. So what we've put forward is, we believe, an approach to add capacity to our existing facilities, particularly in the high demand areas. And then we'll continue to use, should we be successful in getting funding, we'll continue to use those strategies as well as waitlist management. We've also certainly indicated some of the facilities that are coming online over the next 3 years that will add spaces as well.
And do you believe that you've maximized the very most use out of the existing facilities? Because the hours of community centers tend to be rather limited, and we're moving to a city that wakes up a lot earlier, goes to sleep a lot later. Do we have enough programs in the existing facilities? Can we do more?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think in some cases, especially in community centers where there are no fees, the size and number of programs that we operate are limited by the budget. So I think this report does speak to the need and the option of increasing the number of programs in those free centers where there is capacity to expand given the space of those centers. So, I think there is some capacity within our existing community centers to expand those programs, and that's what the report speaks to. The growth through new facilities is a long-range goal that would likely accommodate, growth beyond the 60,000 new spots that we're considering here. So if you look at the total waiting list of approximately 200,000, this strategy puts forward a plan to try and create 60,000 new spaces. The new facilities coming online in the next several years will contribute to that, but certainly are not the only thing to solve the problem.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wong Tam. Councillor Ford?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff. I'm just looking for a number here, and I can't pinpoint it, but what are the total available number of recreation spaces we have in the City of Toronto?
Through the chair, we're searching for that. If you can give us
I think I saw it. Maybe,
We have 619,097 spaces available in our instructional programs, which increased 25,000 over the rec service plan period.
Okay, I see that paragraph. Now, specifically, I'm going to turn to page number 6 and 7 of your report. So currently on the wait list, as said, we have approximately 198,000, and that's the total wait list. And then we have 62,000 unique wait list clients. Can you please explain to the committee what the difference between those numbers are?
Through the chair. So essentially that means that's an individual customer or client who's on the wait listed, so we count them one time. So there's 62,000 unique individuals who have put themselves on a wait list for additional service, but they may be on multiple wait lists, which is why the total number is 198,000.
Okay, so in terms of those numbers, do we ever run into a situation where we have, one individual in 3 or 4 programs and then one individual in no programs? And do we have the ability to, I don't know if prioritize is the right word, but to share the opportunities we have available?
So through you, Mr. Chair, we don't limit or police, so to speak, the number of programs or the types of programs that people can take. It's really an individual option around the kinds of programs, the number of programs, and the frequency of those programs. We've never really thought about putting any types of limitations on the number of programs that people can take.
Right. Okay, and I did have one more question. And how is this going to be connecting to the facilities master plan that we rolled out last council and approved?
So through you, Mr. Chair, the facilities master plan speaks to the need to build some new facilities with growth, as well as replacing some of our older facilities. So the facilities master plan connects in 2 ways. Obviously, with new facilities, we'll be able to offer more programs, and that's connected to this plan directly. But also, as we replace some of our existing facilities, we'll be able to design them in such a way that they can accommodate more programs, especially when it comes to pools and swimming. Modern day pools are larger and more multifunctional than some of the older pools that we have, and can accommodate likely 2 or 3 times the number of lessons that some of the older ones can.
Right. I'm going to go very specific to Etobicoke here, and I know we've spoken with Mr. Data a number of times on this, but on the Centennial Ski Hill, I see there is a wait list for skiing here. Is that contributed or inflated due to some of the challenges we're facing at the hill, or?
Through the chair. So no, that is just generally the sense between Earl Bales and Centennial, the type of pent-up demand for service. So we excluded the unique situation we had last season.
Right. And then my last question is, do we have information available on a breakdown of these wait lists through geographical regions of the city?
We do have that information.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Councillor Cressy.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to our staff and PFNR. I just want to dig in a little further to the financial impact here, if that's all right. So the proposed addition of 10,000 new spaces in 2018, in page 2 of the report in the financial impact, it says that this is being identified as a new and enhanced request for funding in the budget for 2018. Does that mean it's in the budget? Or does that mean when the budget is presented that this will be in a new and enhanced?
Through the chair, it's new and enhanced. It's not part of the base budget. It's a request for new funding.
So when the budget is announced next month, this will not be in the budget?
That's correct. It's not in the base budget.
Okay, so everything we're talking about right now is actually not in the budget. I just needed that clarification.
It's been submitted through the budget process as a new and enhanced business case for an expanded service.
So, okay. And so the cost, should council decide to add it into the budget, will be $386,000 net in 2018. So I guess the question would be, building on Councillor Mihevic's questions, I heard you say that if we had the funds, the capacity we would be able to reach would be 20,000 new spaces in 2018. How much would those additional 10,000 spaces cost? Is it 386,000 times 2, or is it a different, or is there a more specific number?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it would be 386 times 2, so
Okay.
730 something.
All right, Councillor Mihevic, that's your magic number. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cressy. Any other questions? No? Speakers? Councillor Mihevc?
Yes, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank staff for a well-written report. I have 2 motions. One is, and I would draw your attention to page 2 of the 11-page report. The number of new spaces being recommended by staff is 10,000. Their capacity is to deliver 20,000 in 2018. And there really is no reason other than $386,000 for us not to go to the higher number. And I think we should put that number, which is the real need that is out there, before the budget committee. So that's motion number 1. And let me say this: like when certainly in my ward, I see the presence of a lot of young families, renewed neighborhoods coming into play. And then also, I think what's happening as we condominiumize our city, and as we shrink the amount of living space and backyard space and outdoor amenity space that people have in their private world, there's only going to be growing pressure on our recreation system, because that's the place where more people will need to find to play and to recreate. So these numbers are, and as staff has indicated, they're only going to grow, and I think we should meet the challenge, meet the demand. Staff is saying they can do 20,000 spaces. Let's do 20,000 spaces and put that squarely before the budget committee. I would note that really, in terms of real dollars, the total cost here would be $732,000 to serve 20,000 additional recreation users. That seems like a very, very smart investment to me. So that's number 1. Number 2 is specifically to Swim to Survive. People will remember, I think it was up in the northwest part of the city, I don't know if it was in Councillor Ford's area, the young fellow who basically drowned on a school trip. this last summer. It was adjoining ward. I can't imagine us as the country of Canada that has 25% of all the fresh water in the world, not requiring every child to at least learn the minimum of swimming. Now, as I understand it, we have in Toronto something like, is it 22,000? 22,000 grade 4-year-olds. And right now, we can only facilitate 9,000 of them getting learn to swim certification. And it isn't a big course. It's about 3 or 4 classes where they learn some very, very basic skills. We need to get that to 22,000 as soon as possible. Staff have indicated to me that they can do it over a 4-year period, so that we would see 2018 and then into the next term of council, that we establish that as a goal. And wouldn't it be nice, not this term of council, but by the end of next term of council, to say every kid, if you're in the city of Toronto, every kid is going to learn how to swim by the end of grade 4. Or just basic, that's a basic life skill, and that's a right of residency. So that's what the motion 2 tries to do, and it asks staff to incorporate some money into the 2018 operating budget for that purpose. So those are my 2 motions.
Thank you, Councillor Mihevc. Councillor Cressy?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I want to begin by acknowledging what the report acknowledges, which is that in a growing population, we have a corresponding increasing demand for our programs. And I want to thank our staff, Janie Rumoff and Howie Dayton and their teams, for the steps that have been proposed here, both to stem that growth, but also to ramp up our programming in doing so. The challenge, as ever thus at City Hall, is on the financial side. And as we've heard, the proposed 10,000 space increase for 2018 is actually not in the 2018 budget. It is a new and enhanced request in the 2018 budget, which means it will be up to council to fulfill staff's recommendation. And it will be up to council, as per Councillor Mihevc's request, to in fact go to where staff believe we can get, which is 20,000 spaces next year. And so the ball is in our court, and it will be very shortly when the budget is out. And if we believe, as councillors sitting around this table here, and when it comes to the Budget Committee and then council as a whole, if we believe that addressing the waiting list is a priority, then we invest in it. If we don't believe it's a priority, we don't invest in it. It's as simple as that. And so, you know, to be blunt, the fight awaits. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cressy. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move a motion, which the staff will put onto the screen for us. The first 3 components of this motion is largely to lift off the pages of the recommendation of CUPE 79 and to have staff report back on the maximum number of program spaces, which we are already getting to an answer, and also to make sure that it's reported back through the budget process. I didn't necessarily jump right into the quantum and request, but I think we're all getting to the same place. And also to make sure that we can do everything we can to not reduce the number of programs for equity-seeking communities and vulnerable populations. And the third recommendation is, again, directly from CUPE 79, to make sure that we're continuously reporting back on the wait list and how we can continue to grow the services. Recommendation 4 and 5, if the clerks can continue to scroll down to the screen, is asking us to think outside the box. I think we have an opportunity to do more with existing stakeholders and partners, whether it's universities, colleges, or the different school boards, on how we can leverage the assets, the physical real estate assets that they have, and perhaps to staff up with city staff to deliver the program, because we have learned that the facilities master plan, as council has adopted, is going to take us only so far, but it's got a very long timeline for delivery. So if those assets already exist in the communities, then why not go and use them and build those existing partnerships? The Learn to Swim program is already something that we do very well with the Toronto District School Board. Can we scale that up into other facilities? And then finally, I've often said that we have a lot of facilities in the City of Toronto that are already built, and that includes our open spaces, our streets, our sidewalks, our parks, our civic squares. We don't always have to build new community centers every single time in order for us to deliver recreation, arts, and cultural programming. We should be leveraging those city assets when we can, and that's when we can partner up with organizations such as Open Streets Toronto, which actually provides free recreational program across the city anyways, and they don't use any recreation facilities. They basically use the streets. Earth Day Canada has a fantastic program that they're trying to scale up, and that's all about street play. And that's about making sure that kids can go out into their neighborhood and just enjoy the streets and play ball hockey or frisbee or what have you. So is there a way for us to think outside the box and not be too prescriptive that we have to always provide instructional service in a way that that means that we have to have the four walls and the boundaries. So can we do something that, of course, will not replace the high-quality instructional service, but be able to supplement the recreation service needs that we have in the city? And we do that with coordination by breaking down the silos, by working together with strong community existing partners, by ensuring that we have an eye to serving newcomers, youth, low-income individuals, vulnerable populations, and people living with disabilities. And we also do that with a true lens of equity. And I do think that we can do it, but if we were to wait until we were to build a new facility every single year in every single ward, we are not going to get to the bottom of that wait list. And I would even say, Mr. Chair, that I believe the wait list is an artificial number in some ways, because we know that there are many people who don't get on the wait list just because it's too cumbersome. So I suspect that the demand for high-quality recreational service is higher than what the wait list reads, and we could probably do a lot more with a lot less by leveraging partnerships and assets that we have. It won't replace the quality of work that the city will need to do. It will not. But in the meantime, while we scale up the master plan, while we build out those facilities, while we fight for every single dollar in the city budget, and there'll be a lot of pressures, let's see if we can do more with our partners in the community. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have two motions and then the main item. Oh, I'm sorry. You wanted to speak, Councillor Ford? Okay, Councillor Ford?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be very brief. But one of the things I have noticed in my short time on council, but in a community that does, have a demand for recreation facilities, and I know I'm not a stranger to staff when talking about this, but one of the things I see is that as we grow, our capacity as a city to serve our residents and to make sure that there are adequate programs in the city, but I also think it's the programs we are serving in the communities. And one thing I have seen is that not all, as much as we try and as much as our staff do a great job to fulfill the needs of a community, but it's also looking at what a community needs. And I think that's important in the facilities we are offering and recreation programming that we are offering. I also do want to mention I strongly support Councillor Wong-Tam's motion, specifically number 4 of building partnerships. Prior to being at City, I was on the Toronto District School Board, and there was a number of opportunities that fell through when we could have been partnering with, whether it's Toronto Public Catholic Schools, universities, and colleges. So I do think that is the best way to get, I guess, the bang for our buck when investing in facilities and programs. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. So we have two motions before us. Vote on Councillor Mahevik's motion. I want to put it on the screen. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Councillor Wong Tam's motion on the screen. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And the item is amended. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So as agreed, we said we would go to number 7 after the number 3, which is Shelter Infrastructure Plan and Progress Report. We have a long list of deputants. Rafi Aaron, spokesperson, Interfaith Coalition to Fight Homelessness. Thank you for coming, Mr. Aaron. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning. On October 30th, the Toronto Board of Health revealed that we are facing an epidemic of homeless deaths. The numbers are shocking. Almost 2 deaths a week, or 83 deaths since January, with the average age being 48 years old. Homelessness in Toronto is a major risk factor for death. The frontline workers providing service to the homeless population are nothing short of heroic. They are also underpaid, understaffed, overworked, and now overwhelmed with this crisis. These deaths, most of which are preventable, are devastating and demoralizing for them. Adding to their burden, frustration, and anger is a severe lack of shelter beds in the system. This has caused near paralysis at the Peter Street Referral Center. Frontline workers are put on hold for prolonged periods and report being unable to find shelter beds for clients. At one point, there were 80 people there, 40 sleeping in chairs, 40 sleeping on mats on the floor. Mayor Tory's shelter system doesn't acknowledge that homelessness exists 365 days a year. Under his tenure, the majority of new shelter initiatives have been reactionary, focusing on emergency responses as opposed to the creation of permanent shelters and housing supports. The emergency component expands for a 5-month period through drop-ins and the faith-based volunteer run out of the cold shelters. It then contracts for the remaining 7 months, denying people beds, overwhelming frontline agencies, and is a contributing factor to the homeless death. It remains in this contracted state during the month of July, which is tied for the highest number of homeless deaths at 11. So where are the additional 1,000 plus beds that the 2018 Shelter Infrastructure Plan and Progress Report claim are in the system? I would refer you to the Toronto Star article written by Jessica Hales on October 19, 2017, which I've had distributed. Jessica is a nurse practitioner, has worked for 7 years as a street nurse, and has a lot of expertise in this area. Jessica explained to me that many of the beds are in hotel rooms for families, which do not help the homeless men, women, and youth sectors. She also noted that there are replacement beds for Seton House, like the New Red Door and the Runnymede Shelter, but not all of Seton House's beds are being replaced. It should also be pointed out that this report fails to acknowledge flex beds, which are mats crammed into existing facilities that are already overcrowded. Similarly, it has failed to differentiate between mats on a floor without sheets and pillows as opposed to actual beds. The former make up the largest part of its inventory. Speaking of numbers, the affordable housing wait list hasn't been released since early 2016. It used to show how many people on that list were homeless and how many were being housed. I look forward to seeing that information. We are in uncharted waters. We will have to emulate the immense courage and determination of the frontline workers to tackle this situation. Otherwise, the homeless deaths per month are going to continue to rise. The Interfaith Coalition to Fight Homelessness is asking you, 1, to send the 2018 Shelter Infrastructure Plan and Progress Report back to SSHA and demand that it be replaced with a comprehensive plan that addresses the current epidemic of homeless deaths and the ongoing shortage of shelter beds. This plan must be centered around supporting our frontline workers and be created with their input. 2, refer the following as a motion to Executive Committee requesting emergency funding to SSHA for A major offensive led by mental health and addiction workers, B, the opening of 1,000 new shelter beds to relieve the overcrowding in existing shelters so they comply with the city's 90% occupancy rate and provide the many who are turned away with a place to sleep, and C, the immediate opening of 400 of these shelter spaces in large facilities like gymnasiums or armories within 30 days. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for the deputant, Councillor Mahavik.
Yes, so I'm just responding to your deputation. I know that you've been doing great work on this issue with Beth Shalom over the past forever and ever. Today, your big focus is on the desire to really grow the shelter system and not grow the, call it what staff are calling the drop-in system, which is only for the 5 months of winter, and I think there's something like if I remember right, 247 available, 250 beds that might be available there. You're saying that that's not really acceptable. They should be part of regular, fully developed shelter beds. That's your pitch today.
Correct, because when you're opening drop-ins, it's a signal that your whole system is in crisis. They also are not meeting the city's shelter standards, and for health reasons. I mean, I can't understand how, they can go on.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mahavik. Any other questions for the deputant? No? Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Timothy Brown? Timothy Brown? Brian Oliver? Brian Oliver? Peter Wodorek? Peter Wodorek? Kira Hanek? Kira Hanek? Derek George? I finally found someone.
It would have to be me. Yes, my name is Derek George. I represent member advocacy at St. Stephen's. I could follow along the same lines as our first speaker, but I want to talk about the things that have been coming from City Hall. Some positive, but when I think about the homeless crisis, I think about myself and the time I spent on the streets. And now that I'm housed, it's difficult to relate how my life has to change. And I hear a lot about, affordable housing. Affordable housing is a great idea for people who function normally in society. But the homeless, most of them don't function normally in society. So putting them in an environment where they're not comfortable just leads them right back to homelessness. I'm facing eviction simply because I have problems that my neighbors don't want to deal with. I am now so far removed from the help that I need, not necessarily on a daily basis, but I have to travel an hour to get downtown to the drop-in center. In my neighborhood, yes, there are centers, but they don't provide the particular type of needs that I would have, you know, and it's difficult. It is, it's going on 2 years, and it is getting worse. I just lost my dad. I had no way of getting downtown and sitting down with a counselor and having that issue somehow dealt with. So, you know, I feel isolated, I feel alone, and that's one of the reasons, not just affordable housing, but housing geared to the needs of the homeless, especially the chronically homeless. They have needs that regular folks don't understand even, don't want to understand, mostly, you know? So it's fine to say, yeah, we have blanket solutions that'll cover this, that'll cover that. But when we are looking at homelessness and poverty, it's not just blanket solutions. And that's what I've been saying every time I come here. You know, we have to look at how, and it was nice to read that the provincial government got involved in providing funds for developing, and that's the key for me. Forget about the systems that are in place. Yes, there's a shelter system, but it's always overcrowded. In the wintertime, yes, there's out of the cold and there's the warming centers, but they're always crowded. And when you put people in crowded situations, there's gonna be problems. Sometimes, you know, problems that call for police. And I don't think policing is the real issue. I think the issue is developing new systems to deal with these issues. Harm reduction is a big plus for me. If I don't have harm reduction in place, my life will turn into chaos quickly, and I don't want that to happen. And that's why I'm grateful that I could go to St. Stephen's when I really feel a need to, and I could sit down with a counselor and tell them what's going on, you know. So yeah, when we think about this problem, we have to look at more permanent solutions, like developing a housing system where there is infrastructure for people like me, so I don't end up in, you know, market rent housing. I don't want to say, okay, build something where you put a whole bunch of people who have similar problems in there, because that'll create even more problems, because those people are not going to get along, you know. But if it's geared to where people can live comfortably without having outside issues heaped upon them. Like I woke up this morning, couldn't find my wallet, and I know it's always in my back pocket. I had a beautiful sign on the inside of my door that offended somebody, and the sign disappeared. I know if I say to the landlord, I'm going to change the locks, I'm going to get resistance. I'm not allowed. But how am I going to feel safe when I recognize that I'm not safe? You know, and that's what I'm talking about. Most homeless stay homeless to feel safe better, believe it or not.
If you could wrap up, you're a little over 5 minutes.
And that's where I want to end it. I would like to feel as safe as the next guy, you know, and the homeless, they feel safe on the street, safer, believe it or not. And if they had an environment where they could be safe, I can't guarantee that their life would be better, but it would be easier. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Questions for the deputant?
Always forget about that part. Yes.
Well, I have one. You seem to be saying that housing is one thing, supportive housing is quite another. In other words, unless you have housing with support services, wraparound services, substance abuse, mental health, other similar support services, we're really spinning our wheels.
I'm not saying it has to be built into the housing itself, but it has to be readily available for example, if where these things are built, there are community centers where if someone wants to go there and cook a meal, like we have down here, or a center where they can just go and have a meal, you know, where there's support. There's some buildings right here in Toronto where the elderly and the handicapped have all the support they need right in the building, which is great because it allows them to be safer. And similarly, the chronically homeless have similar needs. So having them in there as well, you know, there are many ways of looking at how to do it. What we have to do is do it, right? And I mean, it's sooner than later because the deaths that occur on the street, I think, are preventable, you know, and I've lost another 12, 15 friends over the last 6 months. And I'm getting, I don't know how to grieve most of the time for these friends that I lose, you know, and that's a big issue for me. And like I say, having a place like St. Stephen's to go to, you know, just to talk about it, you know, when your friend who you've known for 30 years overdoses and you know he doesn't do that much drugs, you know, it's a problem, you know. And I think we can solve this problem. I really believe we have what it takes to make this problem go away.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions for the deputant? Steve Mahar?
Thank you. So my name's Steve Mahar. I'm the shelter manager at Christie Refugee Welcome Center. We're one of 6 family shelters in Toronto. I was here last month, so I'm back following up. I'll try not to be here next month. All right, thank you. So what I'd like to do today is address the city's response to City Council's directive that staff report on the feasibility of establishing a 24/7 interim assessment and referral center for homeless families at today's meeting. That was the directive that was passed at last City Council. Before I start, I'd just like to quickly run through some of the following facts. For the past year, family shelters in Toronto have been regularly operating at 100% capacity. That's indicated on the daily shelter census published by the city. Currently, there are over 2,000 children, parents, and family members requiring emergency shelter on a nightly basis. That's one of the largest segments of our homeless population. Due to this lack of emergency shelter space for homeless families, the city continues to operate a waiting list through its central intake program, wherein homeless families can be made to wait up for a week to get a referral for emergency shelter. Out of the 5 recently opened winter respite centers that the city has opened up, none are available to homeless families. And out of the numerous volunteer and community-led out of the cold programs that will be in operation during this winter season, none are designated for homeless families. So in summary, what we're currently experiencing is the largest sector of Toronto's homeless population operating at over 100% capacity, which has resulted in the city keeping a lengthy waiting list for families in need of emergency shelter. Moreover, families who are being forced to wait for emergency shelter are not being provided with anywhere to go, as none of the city's 24/7 support services for the homeless are accessible or appropriate for children and families. This dangerous gap is what led to City Council to direct the city to report on the feasibility of establishing a 24/7 assessment and referral center for families so that a safe space is provided where families can receive immediate support and secure emergency shelter space. And this report was to be delivered today and is part of the progress report. My main concern is, based on the information contained within the report in front of us today, the city has not, to my knowledge, addressed this committee or city council's directive, as there is no actual report on the feasibility of setting up a temporary assessment and referral center for homeless families. In fact, the only mention of this directive can be found on page 8 of the report, where it's stated that the city will examine the feasibility of establishing an interim assessment and referral center for homeless families as part of its 10-year shelter capacity growth plan and its refugee capacity plan, both of which will be in development starting next year. So I'll leave it to the committee and city council to determine if this is an adequate response. But myself and my staff, we find it deeply troubling that a requested report on such a critical service can be deferred in this manner, leaving homeless families without access to safety and support during the upcoming winter season. Asking homeless families to wait for emergency shelter is not an appropriate, responsible, or compassionate response. Failing to provide these families with a safe space to wait for emergency shelter is absolutely dangerous, and choosing to delay or defer action on this critical issue is highly disappointing and problematic. I'll just finish the same way I finished when I was here last month and just say that as a city, we may view our success based on how well we look after our most vulnerable residents. Without question, homeless children are among our most at-risk and defenseless, and we must do more to protect and care for them. Once again, I implore this committee, Toronto City Council, and city staff to stand up for what is right and to ensure that families are not made to suffer without access to shelter and essential supports any longer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for the deputy, Councillor Mihevc?
So if I'm getting you, these might be refugee families, they might be longer-term residents. Is it both groups, or is it a particular group that?
Correct. So it's both. I mean, I think from last month's report, you'll see that refugees, I think, constitute in total about 25% of the homeless population in the city currently. So, but I'm talking about homeless families, and I'm talking about our shelter, which is specifically for refugees, but also the other family shelters, which is not specifically for refugees.
I was under the understanding that once family A, longtime Toronto resident or Canadian resident, family B, newly arrived refugee looking to become refugee claimants. They both call the referral center, and they're immediately given a motel room along the Kingston Road strip, so that they're housed in the shelter system almost immediately in both cases. Is that not happening?
That's not happening. There's currently, as I said, and as a report indicates, last month's report, I believe, there's a wait list to get into any space, whether that's a temporary motel program or one of the permanent emergency shelters. The city, I believe, said it's between 1 and 5 days. I've seen it go up to a week.
Okay. And so what do they do?
Exactly. So the ones...
What do they do?
Some are sleeping on the family shelter's dining room floors and couches if they make it. Other ones are staying crowded with community members. I've had families sleeping at the Tim Hortons, sleeping at the airport. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And you think a referral center, only family-oriented, would be a way to go?
Well, I think that when you have a system that's overcrowded and bursting at the seams, you need these kind of safety net 24/7 supports in place so that there is somewhere to go. And the response I've received is none of the current 24/7 referral centers are appropriate for families. Families and children should not be going to those places.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mihevc. Any other questions for the deputant? No? Kira Heineck? Thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair and Committee. My apologies for not being here earlier, but I appreciate that I can speak with you now. So I'm delighted for the opportunity to speak to you. I'm here on behalf of the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness, We're a large alliance that spans the city of almost 80 organizations and over 100 members. We're here to speak in favor of the update and recommendations to the 2018 Shelter Infrastructure Plan and Progress Report. It is critical that we have the new tools that this plan delivers to respond to the entrenched and serious state of homelessness in Toronto. The key improvements in the plan that we support and ask you to approve today is the move to an annual citywide shelter infrastructure plan that's improved annually by council with financial impacts approved through the budget process. Second is the early and continuous engagement with councillors and community engagement on shelter development. These are excellent steps towards a more collective approach to understanding and serving the needs of all Torontonians, no matter where they live, and builds on good council decisions from April of this year. We also support creating an administrative role to approve shelter sites as per the annual shelter infrastructure plan. And I can tell you from speaking with many in the community, including at the charrette that two of your councillors held, that everyone is in favor of embedding administrative authority within a framework that respects and upholds the accountability and authority of City Council, but allows for annual planning and siting of shelters. This is a mature approach that best reflects the city's responsibilities as a service system manager for housing and homelessness as well. And of course, the new shelter service model, and this is probably equally, if not the most important part. This is a model that will help every person walking through the doors of the new shelters across the city to find more individualized help, intensive case management, to find the supportive housing, the permanent housing that they need. This new model, as I said, employs enhanced case management strategies, as well as the provision of integrated health services. So it's a much better model. And we believe that it's this type of approach that will increase the speed at which we can help address, finally, the capacity issues in the current shelter system. The shelter plan in front of you today is an important tool in ending homelessness in the City of Toronto. This includes adding new shelters and beds into 2018 that will come online as quickly as possible. It includes beds to support the George Street transition and are in addition to the much-needed increases in winter readiness responses that the city has already begun implementing. This year sees a significant increase in the city's ability to serve unsheltered people over the winter, and the councillors in the city departments, as well as the community voices calling for an increased winter response, deserve credit for this. It's an example of the community working well and in partnership with the city, and wouldn't be possible without the hard work and commitment of those operating the services. So we have Margaret's, St. Felix, Warden Woods, Fred Victor, Homes First, and the Salvation Army. And the city councillors who've championed them, some in this room, Kristen Wong-Tam, Joe Cressy, Glenda Bearmaker, Gord Perks, and Lucy Troisi. And of course, while increased winter readiness response is welcome, it's important to remember that it's still only a response that manages homelessness and doesn't end it. We believe we must stay focused on ending homelessness even when striving to do a better job to serving people right now. We've been talking for decades about the crisis of homelessness in Toronto, and it's still a crisis. The only thing we have learned during this time is that focusing on the shelter system does not end homelessness. Yes, our current system is full beyond what experts consider safe and what City Council itself set as a baseline for acceptable capacity levels. But we won't fix it by diverting more and more resources this winter or next into it. We need to dramatically decrease demand for emergency shelters by putting resources to work on actually ending homelessness while at the same time, as I said, serving those most in need this winter. It has to be a balance. Forgive me, I also have a cold, so I need to stop to breathe every once in a while. So what will end homelessness in Toronto? We don't have all the answers yet, but we do know that increasing the amount of deeply affordable housing is part of the solution. So is adding needed supports to allow people to move from homelessness to housing. The plan before you allows us to do that. while at the same time addressing the needs of those in the shelter system. It's a perfect example of the balance of which I speak. SSHA and the city are doing these things right now and can do more if the plan before you is approved. And another step that we're working on with SSHA that I think you should know about is working towards better data on who is homeless and more information on what different needs are. When we have this better real-time data, we'll be able to apply it in improving coordinated access.
You could, you're well over 5 minutes. If you could wrap up, that'd be appreciated.
Thank you. So this will allow us to speed up coordinating people to the right housing that they need. And it's important to know this because as you're facing the winter needs and the approval of the long-term shelter plan, you can be assured that we at the Alliance are confident that working with SSHA will be housing more people quicker than usual. So thank you for letting us speak today in support of this plan, and we hope that you approve it.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Questions for the deputant? Councillor Mihevc?
There was a lot in your presentation there. So working backwards, you like the case management approach to things because you feel that that will basically allow us to do work to keep people housed or to get people housed and keep them housed as a way of basically decreasing demand. That
Yes.
piece is good. Do you feel right now that we have enough shelter, so distinguishing shelter beds from drop-in beds? Do you think right now, or does the coalition, the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness, does your group feel that there's enough there to handle this winter?
You know, that's a really important question. I would say no. We don't believe that there's enough, but there's more than there ever has been. There's significantly more than last year, and I think we can't overlook that. And as I said, we have to strike that balance between investing in what we need right now, which you, the city, have already done more than last year, with also looking at longer-term solutions. So again, this shelter plan, I think, will allow us to do both. And it brings an awful lot of new beds online in 2018 as well.
Right. Okay, so my last question will be this then. Do you think that, so I think we're basically adding this new category in our shelter system, call it the drop-in form of overnight accommodation. Do you think that we should be, that's an important part of the development of the system, or should we just be opening shelters?
I think that we need a variety of responses to meet the different needs that are out there. We know that there's a small portion of folks who are outside that won't come into shelters. Lots of different reasons, and I think you are well aware of what they are. So a drop-in model might work best for some. Again, these are all stopgaps and bandages, though. We need to work together towards an actual housing plan. Sorry?
We're the order of government that does stopgap and bandages. That's our job.
Yeah, but you have my full deputation in front of you, and our alliance also works closely with the province and the federal government, encouraging additional resources to provide those longer-term supports. And there is a role for the city to play there in planning, in allocating, in making the case. We're very happy and willing to work with you on that. And we have a lot of opportunities coming up. We have national housing strategy announcements expected on Wednesday on how we can redirect a significant new amount of funding. And we have Homes for Good from the province. So I think that there are some opportunities in front of us if we commit to the vision of ending homelessness while we're also supporting people who are currently homeless. We can bring a lot more permanent solutions online in the next year, the next 2 years, next 5 years, especially, again, as I said, if we work together.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mihevc. Any other questions for the deputant? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Capri Rabin? Thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you about the
2018 Shelter Infrastructure Plan and Progress Report. My name's Capri Rabin, and I'm the Executive Director of Street Health. We're located at Sherbourne and Dundas. Street Health has been working in the downtown East Toronto community for 30 years, providing nursing, mental health supports, harm reduction, identification, replacement, and storage for all individuals who are homeless, underhoused, and who struggle with poverty. We see over 2,000 client visits every month. We know the challenging housing, shelter, physical, mental health, and substance use issues facing the city. While the proposed plan recommends some very necessary improvements to the administrative functions related to community engagement, expediting the approval of shelter sites as per the Shelter Infrastructure Plan, and enhancing supports for every person identified as homeless in the shelter system, the current plan does not address the immediate crisis that the shelter system is experiencing and the daily impact that this has on people who need to access shelters. This is not new information. It's well documented that the shelter system is well over capacity. I think we've heard that many times over the last today and many years, and there are no beds available in the system. On any given night, many people who are sick and struggling to find shelter are being told, sorry, there's no beds available. And I challenge any of you to call the access lines and see if you can get a bed for somebody, and I think you'll find the same thing. But the city's response has only been to increase the supply of warming center spaces. While this is an important initiative, it does not address the need for shelter beds. Warming centers and out-of-the-cold programs offer a substandard option. They provide mats on the floor or a chair to sit in if you're lucky. They have limited washroom facilities, no shower facilities. These resources are not shelters. The numbers are staggering. According to the city's most recent data, 16,000 unique individuals used the shelter system in 2016. 22%, or over 3,500 people, were identified as being homeless for over 6 months, thereby meeting the definition of chronic homelessness. The use of the city emergency shelter system has been on the rise for several years. In 2017, there were over 5,000 people using the shelter system compared to over 4,000 people in 2016. That's an increase of 20%. This plan being presented to you today identifies a number of shelters currently under development, but most of them are slated for 2019 or are yet to be determined when they'll be open. They will not be available in the short term to address the immediate and ongoing shelter system crisis. Many of the beds identified are not new. They're replacement beds for shelters that were previously closed. For example, 124 beds in the Hope Shelter, which is being replaced by 60 beds in the new Hope Shelter. Some of the beds that were identified in the plan are in fact not even shelter spaces, but transitional housing, such as beds for YouthLink and EGAL. Today, we're asking you, the Community Development and Recreation Committee, to direct Hostel Services to open additional emergency shelter beds. Given the difficulty in securing permanent sites for shelter, we propose that interim sites be opened in city-run facilities such as community centers, and that proper beds, food, and washroom facilities be made available. I'm sure that we all agree that the most marginalized in our city should not be forced to suffer because of the lack of shelter beds. The solution to ending homelessness is to build decent, deeply affordable, accessible housing for all. However, until people have access to more permanent solutions, the city must approve additional shelter spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You'll forgive me, in this room, we use jazz hands and T-shirts. Any questions for the deputant? Councillor Mihevc.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at Appendix 3 of the report. I don't know if you have it in front of you.
Is this this?
Yes, that's the one, yes.
Yeah.
So just for my updating, because we see a lot of these charts and spreadsheets, your recollection is that, or information is that the New Hope is, that's going to house 60 beds. That's not new, that's actually a cut of, could you repeat that part?
64. So the original Hope Shelter had 124 beds, and now they're reopening with the new Hope Shelter with 60 beds.
So that's a decline
That's a
of,
decline of 64 beds, yeah.
And then the other ones, could you go through those other two pieces that you had?
So Youth Link is in fact a transitional housing. It's not a shelter, as far as I'm aware. The City of Toronto Birchmont Residence is a replacement for, and EGAL is transitional housing. And the remainder under the George Street redevelopment is actually to accommodate the relocation of the changes that are anticipated with the Seton House closure. So they're actually not new beds, but replacement beds.
So how about Homes First? Do you have any insight there? Is that brand new?
I'm just looking back at my colleague.
This one's already open. It's unclear how many additional beds there will be.
So Homes First is already open, but it's unclear how many of those are additional beds.
Okay. I'll ask staff as well. Okay, thank you very
Okay.
much. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor Mihevc. Any other questions for the deputant? Councillor Wong-Tam?
Yes, thank you. With respect to the request for emergency shelter beds, I think what we see in this report is that it's very difficult for staff to find facilities, to secure them, to fixture them, then to staff them up. And how do you reconcile the city's ambitions to open shelter facilities based on the need and the fact that we seem to have run into these obstacles of standards and qualifications and how to get it done with physical spaces, the lack of? Yes, I've heard that is an ongoing challenge. However, I don't think that investing additional resources into warming centers and assuming that that's going to meet the need for shelter spaces is actually the way to go. I mean, yes, we need warming spaces. Those are big improvements, and the fact that they're open longer is actually a huge improvement for folks, but it doesn't replace the shelter spaces. So I think the solution, I don't know what the solution is. I'm assuming that Shelter Support and Housing has some additional information around that. But I do think, city-run facilities might be the way to go in the short term. And in the absence, so what you're saying is take the existing warming facilities that we are opening and add shelter beds to them. Is that what I'm hearing you say? Oh, if it's suitable. I mean, all the facilities couldn't really accommodate shelter beds because of the locations that they're in, but adding additional shelter beds somewhere in the system is what we're asking for. And so how would you respond to staff concerns that it doesn't meet standards? So standards with respect to privacy, standards with respect to space allocations per individuals. Well, they're not meeting standards now. And give us an example of us not meeting the standards today. So if you go to any warming center right now, you can see that there are no standards being met. The standards for washroom facilities, the standards for the fact that mats are on the floor and are inches apart from each other, which doesn't even meet the basic requirements for shelter standards. The Out of the Cold programs do not meet the basic standards for shelter standards. So we're already created a system that doesn't meet those basic standards. That is the norm right now. So we're looking for shelters that actually do meet the standards. To meet the standard, it takes time, it takes sort of discipline to introduce the physical spaces and the service levels. At the same time, we've got this dramatic need, as highlighted by just about everybody, including the city staff at this point. But are you saying that we suspend those standards to scale up emergency shelters? Because there's two things I'm seeing. It's like one is the request for emergency accommodations now, and then there's the longer-term strategy of building proper facilities. Are you asking for those two things? Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wong-Tam. Any other questions for the deputant? Okay, thank you very much. Timothy Brown and Peter Warderek. I understand you're deputing together. Thank you very much.
My name's Tim Brown. I'm here on behalf of the Housing Advocacy Committee at Sound Times. And Sound Times is a consumer survivor, member-based mental health and justice agency. We have over 2,400 members, most of whom use shelter services and face barriers due to mental health and substance use disabilities. We've developed expertise by experience. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'll just we'll talk about the urgent need for shelters, how shelters cause stress, how shelters need to be more flexible, focus on dignity and treating us like adults, homelessness as a label, and recommendations in 2 minutes. I'll skip over, shelters are full, we know that. When people move inside, they're forced to live together, squeezed together, and this creates stress. It creates spaces where people end up rubbing against each other and can lead to conflict, illness, and longer term spent in shelters. When shelters are unhealthy, then shelters get more expensive. One of our members said that the conditions at shelters make me want to go down to the south. At least there's a bed and a warm space there. To be clear, that's the Toronto South Detention Centre, known as a hellhole. We're focused on, I'm sure people have talked about crowding and smells, theft and violence. But I'd like to, if you're taking a message back to constituents, there's an everyday trigger that hopefully they'll understand. Imagine how frustrating it is to sleep next to a snorer that you love. Then imagine sleeping next to a bunch of snoring strangers. That disruption to your sleep can cause anyone to have stress and anyone to have mental health issues. This leads to people acting out and making shelters less safe, less efficient, and much harder places to live.
Okay, so hello, I'm Peter. I represent Sound Times. So shelters need to be more flexible when it comes to behaviors for people that have mental health disabilities. You can't just bar a certain person, regarding a mental health disability. That's not right. And staff need to be trained when it comes to people with mental health disabilities. Because it's violence.
So
barring should be the last resort for a staff to bar a certain person. Maybe if you talk to the certain person, instead of barring them and kicking them out on the cold nights. Thank you.
We're adults. We deserve to be treated as adults and provided things like reasonable curfews, lockers with free locks, and respect for our differences. This will make a healthier and safer environment and shorter stays. We're not talking about condoning violence. We're talking about condoning mental health crises and mental health issues like talking to yourself or moving around, having showers when you're dealing with trauma. That understanding will make shelters run more smoothly and will make them safer and healthier for everyone. Members emphasize that shelters should be accountable to clients. Money given by the City of Toronto to shelters is for the benefit of clients. So we need to both get the services and we need to be involved in delivering services and evaluating when services are working. Just briefly, there's a question in the report about homelessness as a label. We'd like to emphasize, don't stereotype us. A member of our group told us it's not their fault. It's what they see in the news. We're not all dangerous, and if that's all I saw, I would judge us too. So we encourage you to talk to your constituents about the everyday challenges that anyone would face if they had no other choice but to go to a shelter. And we would prefer the label to be housed because we would actually have housing. And I had my recommendations. Okay, well, I guess I'll just to sum up the recommendations, to create shelters that treat us like adults based on respect and dignity, are accessible both for wheelchairs, but also accessible for people who are dealing with different mental states and dealing with different substance use, and to acknowledge our collective humanity. Take a first step of creating this 1,000 new shelter beds, the 400 emergency beds, and and create accessibility in our shelter system and for the people of Toronto. Thanks. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions for the deputants? No? Okay, thank you very much. And just a reminder to members of committee and members of the audience, we will be doing the City Hall launch of the My Toronto calendar to bring awareness and support for the homeless at 12:30, just outside the doors. Toby Nickel. Thank you very much for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Hi, I'm Toby Nickel. I'm glad to be here again. I'm a peer leader at St. Stephen's Community House and an activist. Before I read my thing, I would just like to note to the City Council and our mayor that, because I'm a person with lived experience, I am not scary and I'm not a tweaker, and I don't appreciate being referred to that way, or I think a lot of my friends or fellow people who struggle with mental health and addiction don't appreciate being referred to that. So I really don't appreciate the article from this morning's 24 Hour. Just before I read my thing, also, I started this morning at our drop-in at 7 o'clock. We open at 7:30. We work with a lot of the clients who come from St. Felix. So normally, about a couple of years ago, we just serve them food and we help if they need housing or whatever, but we've actually had to put more staff on the floor. I was kind of running late to get here, and I intake 6 new clients, and that's a record for us. We had at a coordinator's door this morning about 5 or 6 clients who were barred from St. Felix. So my feeling, a lot of our peers are now working at St. Felix. The system is stretched. This month I have 3 deaths I'm going to, and they're in our area, Queen West, Meeting Place. It's a struggle. And it hurts just because I'm a person with lived experience, so I've lived with them on the street. Now I work with them. They're dying. It's time that somebody does something. I mean, I did a month with the Moss Park injection site, and that was traumatic enough. I had to take some week off just for self-care. So there's a lot of people who are with lived experience who are working. I think the city should recognize that and maybe start using them alongside with street to homes workers to get people housing, supportive housing. All right. If you have to sleep all winter on a mat on the floor with the conditions of overcrowding, it leads to more stress, illness, violence, and make mental health issues worse. The shelters are a borderline okay, but we do not accept that you will try this winter to rely on out of the cold. This is not good enough. It brings everyone down because it's overcrowded. We do not accept that you will put mats on the floor in warming centers and all-night drop-ins. The mats will be too close together. They're not proper showers or enough staff. They also won't have enough food. We need shelters to be improved with real beds, no mats on the floor. The shelters are already overcrowded and need more beds, especially downtown. I work at the drop-in at St. Stephen's Community House, and I see a change of the people that used to come in. They used to come in with a smile. We have too many people showing up, and they're desperate and shocked from the lack of safe places to sleep. I observe how people are being treated in the city system, and it's very upsetting. Just to elaborate on the city system, a lot of our clients comment on the city referral center. When I do outreach on the weekend, I took it 2 weeks ago to go visit our referral center, the city hub of all our services. And I witnessed on one of the extreme code alerts, one of the youth getting kicked out because the staff did not, well, they only have 2 people at the front desk and a city security guard. They could not deal with somebody in crisis. Although we hired 60 street to homes workers, they could have called one of them So they kicked the young youth out in the extreme cold alert. I almost like, I had to leave because I would have broke down and stuff. So that's our city hub. I find it hard to refer people when I'm working with them on the street to the city referral center, and I think that's just sad at the state. It should be a city that cares for everyone, not cutting life and death services to balance the budget. The all-night drop-ins were never set up for shelters. This is not appropriate to make people who are homeless sleep in them. We need more downtown shelter space for women, men, trans, and others, with LGBT community. The city needs to hear us on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for the deputant? None? Thank you very much. Calvin Henschel.
Good morning and greetings. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity today to talk to you about issues close to my heart and for your effort to listen. My name is Calvin Henschel. I am a community outreach worker with the Regent Park Community Health Center. I provide street-based outreach services in the downtown east side of Toronto. I've been providing these services for 20 years. I was also a former homeless person in Toronto for almost 10 years. I have a keen personal interest and professional interest in the state of Toronto's emergency shelter system. I am here today as a part of a group of agencies that also provide social and health services for homeless people in Toronto. I would like to submit a shared letter that expresses our shared experiences and advice to community members and shelter support housing administration staff. So I have a letter here, many copies that can be provided. In my work for the past few months, since the summer started to change the seasons, there has been a marked increase in the number of homeless clients experiencing great difficulty in acquiring an emergency shelter bed. This has led to a marked increase in the number of people sleeping outside. Sleeping outside can impact a person's overall health, including premature death. We are seeing more people in a state of fragile health, more people suffering from a lack of sleep, bordering exhaustion. Every day, there are 10 to 20 people sleeping in our waiting areas and offices at the health center. This experience is not unique to our organization, but is being experienced across agencies throughout Toronto. Every year at this time, the city shelter system struggles to meet the needs of homeless people looking for an emergency shelter bed. The capacity of the adult shelter system runs at 99 to 100% capacity every night. The out-of-the-cold shelter system opens and capacity is usually reduced by 1% for a short period of time. The emergency shelter system is often running at 99 to 100% capacity for several years now. This year is different. In the not-so-distant past, my homeless clients could be forced to sleep outside for a lack of unavailable bed. They often stayed outside for a few days until a bed could be acquired. Now, clients are forced to stay outside for weeks before a bed can be found. This lack of available beds is different than other years, as there are an influx of refugees that have also needed emergency shelter in Toronto. Another reason the shelter is at full capacity is that homeless people are not able to find housing. The vacancy rate is at 1% or less.
Okay, so we have one deputant.
And rents have doubled in the past year. Many homeless people using government income support programs are unable to rent an apartment or room as rents exceed available funds. A room goes for $1,000 per month. A bachelor now costs $1,200 per month. Toronto's housing market will continue to put pressure on its emergency shelter system for the foreseeable future. The lack of beds may account for the high number of homeless deaths now being recorded by public health staff. While I support elements of the proposed shelter infrastructure plan, such as providing additional case management positions and a 10-year planning cycle, and the proposed structure to require future shelter facilities, we are disappointed in today's infrastructure plan and progress report, as it does little for the immediate pressures currently faced by emergency shelter services and homeless people looking for a shelter bed. We bring a list of possible solutions for your consideration and action today. Firstly, we need to open a facility that offers immediate beds to become available. A large site such as Moss Park Armories or a city recreation center may do. Secondly, we need to add an additional 1,000 new beds to current service levels. These additional beds should be low threshold and harm reduction focused. Outreach services should also provide winter survival gear such as clothing, blankets, and sleeping bags for food people required to sleep outside. Lastly, we want the replacement of beds from shelters slated to close, such as Seton House, to be replaced with emergency bed, not counting the drop-in centers, transitional housing beds, or other beds deemed in the warming centers. I would like to thank you for your consideration today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the deputant? Councillor Mihevc.
Thank you very much. Just speaking to at the end of the day, just speaking to the issue of capacity of our system, and I've seen you before, I've met you around. I trust your word. We have just added 250, since I think November 15th, 250 spaces in newly established drop-in or renewed drop-in centers. Out of the cold has also opened. Are you saying that still is not meeting capacity?
Still, we need 1,000 new beds.
Where did you get that number?
Partially because we're looking at 90% capacity, but there's also large numbers of people that aren't being counted, people being released from institutions, people that are coming from other kind of housing situations where they're not counted, like if they're sleeping on a couch, for instance, and they can no longer stay there, or they have no other options, and the emergency shelter system is the last option. So even currently now, we're still seeing 10 to 20 people per day in our center sleeping, and most of those are folks that have really poor health and are near exhaustion. So that's where that comes from.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mihevc. Any other questions for the deputant? No? Okay, thank you very much. Patricia O'Connell. Thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm from an organization called Sistering, which is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week drop-in for homeless or precariously housed women, most of whom have significant mental health issues or addictions issues. We've been open for 2 years, just this month, and we were open because a woman was sexually assaulted 2 times in one evening at the same location by 2 different men, and that was in 2013, and the city's response was to open 2 24-hour-a-day drop-ins for women. And just sitting here today, clearly we are in a shelter crisis, and I feel like I'm a City Hall staff person now because I've been down here at various committees so much over the last year and a half. But we are in such a crisis that this committee has to do something about it. I know shelter support and housing are doing what they can within their mandate, within the budget that they have, but we are letting our most vulnerable citizens literally die in the streets. And that's not hyperbole. You've heard that in other committees. We need more affordable housing, we need more supportive housing, and we need more shelter beds. I will say before I go much further that I do support the shelter supports motion to delegate authority. I worry about it though because it's being delegated to a whole bunch of departments, and when you get a whole bunch of bureaucrats in the same room with different interests, sometimes the right decision isn't reached, but hopefully Mr. Rafkis can steer that through. So I think that's a good thing. I'm here really to speak on behalf of women, and we need increased number of low barrier, harm reduction focused shelters. The women that come to Sistering are often barred from the existing shelter system due to their mental health or addiction problems, and we need places for them to go. I'm not discounting all the other needs we have as well. In fact, when I was listening to the chap from the family organization, in October, 3 families came to Sistering for shelter. And we're not a family organization. We don't support men. We don't support children in our facility. And yet we were able to put them into what we call our crisis room, a little room that was 7 by 6, until we could find them someplace else to go. And as you've heard, there's no place for them to go. The city recently added 30 more mats to Fred Victor for women. Those mats were full as soon as they were on the ground. 30 more beds went into the Kennedy shelter for women. Those beds were snapped up right away. We're at capacity every single night and have been for probably 3 months after we opened. We have 12 reclining chairs, then we have mats on the floor, and then people have the floor. And that is no way for people to live. Women stay with us. We've had women that stay well over a year. Months at a time, they stay sleeping on the floor because they have a safe place. They get 3 meals a day. We have 1 shower for the hundreds of women that come to Sistering, but they feel safe and they have some security. They're not on the street. I think that it is absolutely imperative that this committee get this issue before the mayor and executive. We need the mayor to declare this an emergency so that shelter support and housing can get some beds open immediately. As you've heard, we need 400 spaces now. We need to have them in the next 30 days. And down the line, right in line with that, we need 1,000 permanent new beds. The plan for 2018-19 replaces beds that have been lost to the system. There are no new net beds. Is that correct English? No new net beds? I'm not sure. No new beds. But I think the city has facilities that you can use. You have community centers. You have other buildings. You have a lot of real estate. And I think with the will, there's a way, and you could turn those spaces into at least safe spaces for people to stay, so they're not going to die on the streets, and that they get some type of proper care until the bigger housing issues can be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wong Tam and then Councillor Mahevik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to have an understanding about the services of Sistering. You are exclusively a drop-in facility.
We are, but we have a large wraparound set of services as well. So we have, in partnership with Inner City Health, we have 4 GPs and 3 psychiatrists. In partnership with Jean Tweed, we have a psychotherapist, we have an immigration lawyer, we have a nurse from St. Elizabeth, We have a whole cadre of social worker counselors that work on case management, that work on housing issues. We have a number of new housing staff, thank you to Shelter Support and Housing, and we have 3 social enterprises.
Out of all those services that you've just listed, I didn't hear shelter.
No.
Or emergency shelter accommodations or facilities.
No, we do not have that. We are a drop-in, and I've been advocating with staff for 3 general managers, since 3 general managers ago, for a shelter, low barrier harm reduction shelter for women.
How many women are sleeping or staying in your drop-in center right now, using your facility as a shelter facility?
We have between 50 and 67 staying every night. 50 is what we consider our capacity. However, when we were open 2 years ago, the proposal was to support 20 to 30 women. We've been beyond that after the first 3 months.
The intention was to support 20 or 30 women dropping in, not staying overnight, because you're not you don't have the facilities. And now there's almost triple the number, and they're staying overnight.
That's right. Originally, though, the space was for people to drop in overnight as well, but it was, as you say, for 20 to 30.
And the number of services that you listed in terms of providers and partnerships that you have, who are the primary funders of those services?
We have the city and the Toronto Central LHIN are the 2 primary funders, and the United Way also gives us support. And we do $500,000 a year of fundraising.
And you're saying that you're also saying that the women who are there, who are staying overnight, there's no other places for them to go.
There's no place to go. You can sit on that phone line and phone central intake till you're blue in the face, and there's no space. Because we're 24/7, we phone that line all the time, and it's next to impossible to get a bed.
How many other facilities and service providers in the city that are not designated as shelters, that are drop-in facilities, that offer programming, wraparound programming, do you think are acting like your facility as an ad hoc shelter?
I would say that Fred Victor's women's drop-in is similar. And quite frankly, I don't know the other drop-ins, the mixed drop-ins. I'm really only familiar with the 2 women's.
So the 2 warming centers, the 24-hour facilities that were intended to truly be drop-in, have now turned into, both Sistering as well as Fred Victor have now turned into sort of pop-up shelters for the women who are there.
That's a great way to describe it, because people live there. It's their home. They develop a sense of community. They develop friendships, and they refer to it as their family and their home.
And you mentioned you have 1 shower?
1 shower.
For the 67 women that are there. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mihevc.
Do you have the on-site ability with some capital dollars to convert to a full shelter?
No, we don't have the space.
If the city were to work with you to find a place and develop a shelter, would your board be supportive?
I would jump in with both feet, as would our board. I've already had this discussion with the board of directors. They understand the issue, and they would take it on as soon as it was offered.
Has that ever been offered to you?
No. I've asked, as I said earlier, the 3 different general managers. I've put this proposal before them. However, Mr. Tanner is prepared to work with Sistering to develop a model, which we can do and which we're working on. But if Mr. Tanner were to say to me this afternoon, you can have this shelter and you can have it open on Friday, I would take it and I would open it.
Okay, and Since November 15th, when we've opened 250 additional drop-in beds, places, have you noticed a decrease in the pressure on you?
No. It never decreases.
So you're saying the pent-up demand is that big?
Yes. Honestly, I'm not exaggerating when I say it's a crisis. And I was just saying to one of my colleagues, I've only been in this field for 2 years. If I'd been in it any longer, I would be a rabid deputant, because we are not serving these people.
Okay, thank you very much, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Mahavik. Any other questions for the deputant? No? Thank you very much. Paul Dowling? Thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes.
Good morning. So my name is Paul Dowling, and I'm here this morning on behalf of Homecoming Community Choice Coalition, which works from a human rights perspective to ensure that people who are marginalized by poverty or disability can live in the neighborhood of their choice without discrimination. Discrimination which often includes community resistance to efforts to locate new shelters and affordable and supportive housing. So I spoke to this committee, the Community Development and Recreation Committee, in April when the consultant's report was brought forward, proposing improvements to the process for site selection for emergency shelters. And at that time, I applauded the consultant for an excellent report and voiced the support of Homecoming for all of the recommendations that were presented by staff. So Homecoming continues to be very supportive of the recommendations being put forward by staff today to complete the work that was begun in April to improve the process for selecting shelter sites. As the report describes, and as we've heard from several deputants this morning, the need for emergency shelters is great and it's continuing to grow. But the process for locating appropriate sites is challenging. I was struck by looking at the report by the limited number of sites that were assessed and found to be suitable from a fairly large pool. The report says that out of a pool of 191 sites that were looked at, in the end, only 6 of them have the potential to be used as shelter sites, and only 1 is actually moving forward. When we think of the urgent need to respond to the growing need for safe and supportive places for people who are homeless and on the street, it's crucial to avoid any unnecessary delays in confirming appropriate sites. And the report proposes that a streamlined process within the context of an approved annual infrastructure plan. Well, like all of you and like all of the deputants, we know that the real solution to homelessness is access to permanent, affordable housing. So for that reason, we are also very pleased to see that the service model for Toronto's shelter system that is being piloted includes an enhanced case management model to support homeless people to access and maintain permanent housing. We see the recommendations that are before you today as a very positive step forward, which, along with increased housing support from all levels of government, can help to end homelessness in our city. And we commend staff for their work, and we encourage you to support the recommendations.
Thank you very much. Questions for the deputant?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Tim McGuire?
Good morning again. So you have a briefing note from CUPE Local 79 on this matter as well. But before I start you can have it to read. I'm now reminiscing about this process last year. On February 15th, the mayor of this city and a majority of councillors voted not to sustain the shelter budget. Well, I'm tempted to read out those names. I think the more prudent goal is to ensure those names vote in the other direction for the 2018 budget. That same day, a young Indigenous man died, a homeless man died, and that generated a concern for a brief period of time that our shelters actually have the capacity to serve the growing number of homeless in this city. I want to thank the community groups that are out here today holding our feet to the fire to ensure that city services and parallel services are in place to serve our homeless. But I think that we have to do the right thing and ensure that councillors understand what's happening in our city and to support the growing number of homeless in our city. Local 79 has 5 recommendations to make. 1, include the 2018 shelter infrastructure plan, the opening of 1,000 new shelter beds to meet the standard of 90% shelter capacity across all sectors. This must include low-threshold harm reduction-focused shelters. 2, direct staff to complete its long-term sustainability plan for staffing in shelters as part of the 2018 budget process. Out of last year's budget, there was a commitment not only to cut the positions and to find a solution to keep the positions in place, there was also a commitment to have a sustainability plan for staffing in shelters. The city needs to move forward, not just react to what happened last year and say we're going to do a sustainability plan, but actually do it. Our staff are overwhelmed. The shelter system is overwhelmed. I went out to Peter Street the other day and just to check in on staff and how things were going because we know they're overburdened. They couldn't talk because they indicated, I quote, "We're in crisis mode. I don't have time." But I'm hearing through our representatives that there are huge concerns about the capacity. So that sustainability plan ought to include the number of staff, a review of its current availability and scheduling practices to make sure that people are actually scheduled and sustained and predictable so that the service is more predictable. 3, direct staff to include a plan to deal with overcrowding and understaffing at the Assessment and Referral Center located at 129 Peter Street. 4, direct staff to include investments in new family shelters parallel to the funding of a new assessment and referral center, so families assessing this service will have housing to be referred to. What ought to be included in that is not only a referral center, but to ensure that the city itself has enough space and parallel community service have enough space for families to go. The only place that I'm aware of where city direct operations allow a woman to bring her partner in so that they're together is out on Kingston Road. The city really has to do a better job both at direct services and at other community agencies to ensure homeless families can be housed. And 5, direct staff to include and consult with Local 79 on staffing models and training as the city develops an implementation its new service model in the 5 pilot shelter sites. So you can read the rest of our briefing note, but we have, just returning to the Peter Street situation, we have our health and safety people looking into what's happening there in terms of our staffing. I would borrow a line from the CLC in our health and safety world, which is we should continue to mourn for the dead, but we have to fight for the living to make sure that they are still alive, those homeless on our streets.
All righty. Thank you very much. Questions for the deputant? None? Okay, thank you very much. Gregory Cook? Kathy Crow?
Hi, thank you very much, especially for the timing that you did today. Appreciate it. So I'm a rabid deputant, I suppose. Maybe 30 years coming close to. So I want to begin by mentioning that last week I called the Toronto Ombudsman's office to give an update on what I was hearing. I'm getting calls and emails 24/7 from frontline workers just because they know me, and sometimes they're working in agencies and they may not know the process or be allowed to speak out. And what I was told that their monitoring of the emergency winter relief this year, it has to respond to complaints. So here's my complaint. Last week, we added 8 names, 8, to the monthly homeless memorial. I know Councillor Ainsley will find that especially shocking. You've heard about the emergency response. Much of what you've heard today, I've heard, but I want to tell you something that I have to speak to because I haven't heard it yet, and it's a real warning signal. In the early 2000s, I made a film in Calgary called Home Safe Calgary, and it was about families and children. When we were there, and it continues to this day, we saw homeless families with children sleeping in their equivalent of the Out of the Cold program. It's called In from the Cold there. What I've heard today suggests to me that we should be warned, seriously warned, that if we don't do something about the family-children system, we are going to see children and families ending up, as we heard, at sistering and eventually in the Out of the Cold program. And I've always prided myself that Toronto might be the city that never, never allows that. But if you don't step up and do something, we're going to see that happen. The system is in chaos. The emergency shelter system, you've heard over and over again, is full. The Out of the Cold program, you've heard spoken to from Rafi. The warming centers, then called 24-hour overnight drop-in centers, now renamed respite centers, are still warming centers that are overnight shelters, and they're full. And the fact that shelter standards are not even attempted to be met in terms of number of showers, bed spacing, the provision of cots is really, there's really no excuse for attempting to make some minimum standards to be met. I've been told that last week at Peter Street it was so full, and you've heard that today, that people were moved in the middle of the night to Seton House. I heard and was told by a Frontline worker that 2 people were there in wheelchairs at Peter Street because there were no wheelchair accessible beds in the shelter system. I don't know how many wheelchair accessible beds there are in the shelter system. There's quite a lack of transparency. The main shelter system, and Seton House is the case here, is that for 2 to 3 weeks, there were numerous complaints to frontline health providers and to the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty that a number of people were not getting even blankets and pillows. That has been rectified through going through the channels, but it took 3 weeks. I was told yesterday that the respite centers, also known as the warming centers, are full. You've heard that today, and they're sending people in taxis to the Out of the Cold program. That happened Saturday night at Blythewood. It is so inefficient. It is so incompetent. It is so overloaded. It is so stressed. And it's a huge worker safety issue, let alone for the volunteers that don't even have the amount of social service training that shelters do. So what are you going to do? You can rename the shelters, you can develop the long-term plan, but we're here again. People are here again to tell you about the emergency now. People are dying, people are forced to live in huge indignity, and it's not right. And really, I think the mayor needs to be spoken to so that there is the direction for staff to take immediate and drastic action. As of today, and I think it's kind of a shame that I had to keep my petition on change.org into the second winter, but we're at 18,000 signatures now. Hashtag open the armories, or something similar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for the deputant? No? Gaetan Hero? Go.
I'm okay with this mic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I didn't put my name down, but as I was listening, I felt I had to say a couple of things. I do want to talk a little bit about the issue of not meeting standards, the fact that we have so many beds now that do not meet the hostel standards, and we have some that do. But before I start, I just want to tell a few stories. And just people don't know me, I'm a member of Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, but I've also worked at Dundas and Sherbourne for the last 30 years in day shelters, drop-ins, and stuff like that. I want to start by just, first of all, you won't be able to see this, but I have a couple of marks on my arm, this the one there, a couple on my back, on my legs. Those are bed bugs. I go to Maxwell Megan, Fred Victor, Evergreen, and I forget the other one, 519. And there are times I come out of some of those places, and I'm very itchy. and I get bit. Now, I have the option of going home and showering and doing my sheet, but I have seen men at Maxwell Megan come to me while I replace ID, show me their arms covered in bed bites, being told I can't stay here, being told that night that they have to stay in the same bed. Could you do that? Could anyone in this room go back to that bed knowing that you're going to get bitten again? This is normal. The other story is when we were hearing about Peter Street, which, by the way, Peter Street is the place where people are supposed to go and be referred to a bed. And then we began to hear that now that 40 to 50 people sometimes are sleeping on chairs and on the floor. And obviously that's because there are no beds available. Maybe staff has another example, but that tells us the hostel bed is full. One of the men I ran into that night when I was talking to them was, I think he'd been there for 4 or 5 hours. He was given a bed. This is after they had to lock the doors because they're too busy. After he came out, I talked to him. And he was being sent to York. I guess there were some mats at the York place and stuff, the Fort York. And he was going to send there, and I talked to him, and I think what happened, he lost his job, he went on unemployment, couldn't afford his apartment anymore, and he was on the streets. Now, what will happen to that man is he was going to go to Fort York, but from there, he had to go through the whole process again to find a bed. And I assume that meant going back to Peter Street. I don't know. And I didn't get to talk to him after. That's probably what would happen. Just the other day, I was on the phone to someone at the Gateway Center at Salvation Army, and I could overhear workers say to the person, here, put your name on the list, which is very common at the Gateway because it's one of the shelters that people want to go to. And he put his name, and the worker said, come back at 9 p.m. and we'll see if we have a bed for you. How does that work? That you go there and you spent from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. not knowing where you're going to stay? I really want to stress this because we have hundreds of people now who don't know whether or not where they're going to stay this night, whether it's another CUPE program, by the way, they make their way there. That's the norm. The last story I want to say really quickly is that this summer, when on my way to work, actually on my way to Fred Victor, I was going down by Dundas and Sherburne area, and police had roped off an area, and it's where Carl White, a 27-year-old Aboriginal man, OD'd. That was the beginning of the day for me very troubling. Now, I really want to stress that around the shelter, the standards, and I remember going to Margaret's last year at 6 in the morning and seeing people sleeping under tables and on chairs in the hallways. One washroom, the washroom for I think at that point, I think we counted 80 people. There was one, in the men's washroom, there was one toilet and one of the urinals was broken. And people were living like that day in and day out. And for us, I think, and this is my challenge to the city, and maybe, maybe we could do what we did in 1996, because I was around 1996. Many people who were in this room were around in 1996 when those 4 men died on the streets: Eugene Upper, Erwin Anderson, and Marcellus Compani. I remember those days. I remember being in Metro Hall, actually, and when Marcellus Compani's body was found. And city was voting on whether or not to give $600,000 or not to open up more shelters. I remember being that day. And I think that this situation is as bad, if not worse, right now. And I challenge you right now to open up the Fort Armories and Moss Park Armories immediately, to open up and see what happens. See what happens. And the reason I say the Fort York Armories is because I visited Fort Armories and so did Kathy Crow, and there were cots that were, had space between them. They have showers, they have washrooms. So do it. If you want to do it for a month to start with to see what happens, but you have to deal with the overcrowding and the crisis that you have right now. You can't continue to say, listen, everyone knows that, I'll end there, anyone knows that housing is the answer. That's,
if you could,
common sense knows
you're
that
a little
that's the
over,
answer. But you can't sit here and say
5 minutes,
that
if you could wrap up.
we can't have enough shelters for people. We can't build it. You can't. Do you know where you're going to sleep tonight? Yes. I have a bed. Yes. Should we not, all this in the city, know where we're going to sleep tonight?
We recognize there's a crisis. We just have to deal with it.
That's it.
It takes money and policy.
And willpower, right? Political will. Yeah.
Political will,
Yes.
money,
Yes. Yeah, I have a quarter.
cooperation from our other levels of government.
That's my comment.
Thank you very much. Questions for the deputants? Councillor Mihevik.
No? You don't have to. Only if you'll believe me. If you believe what I say, you don't have the question. There you go. You okay? Yeah.
Ask this. So, like, you've been around a long time, I've been around a long time.
We counted beds one time, 302 beds shutting down. I remember that day. Sorry, go ahead.
What I'm hearing is that folks are saying it is different this year than the history of different years. Is that's what I'm hearing.
I think it's as bad or worse than what we had after the haircuts in 1996.
Even with these extra drop-in beds that have been open out of the cold, motel beds out in Scarborough.
Yeah, I can't speak to families and children, unfortunately, but I can tell you about single adults.
What's happening? I have my theories. I'm wondering what your theories are and what's happening out there.
Well, when I talk to people, people just don't have the money to rent a place. There's nowhere to go. You're shutting down rooming houses, are shutting down the Arms Hotel and Parkdale is shutting down. All of these housing are disappearing in our neighborhood. We're losing the housing. With all the rooming houses are going, there's nowhere for people to go. That's the easiest answer. There's nowhere people to go, so they're forced into the shelter system. I think that's the simplest answer.
High rents pushing out people on modest rents, pushing out people on lower rents, pushing out people in rooming houses, pushing people to the streets.
People are just, and Kristen Moore and Tam, and you would notice that, whether it's Jaggies or the rooming houses across from, 3 rooming houses shut down across from All Saints. I mean, that's I know there's, Councilor Cressy talked about Parkdale. If you were to look at what's happening in Dundas East area, you'd find a similar story. So as a result of that, people have no choice but to go there. But I don't want to talk. I really, really want to say that listen, you have a crisis, it's hard to deal with. I understand the problem. But you can't leave a system like this and workers like myself and others with people at the door and saying, I just don't have anything for you. I just don't. You can't have a situation where hundreds, I don't know how many people, don't know where they're going to sleep tonight because you're just destroying people. Okay.
All right, thank you, Councillor Mihevc. Any other questions for the deputant? No? Okay, thank you very much. Questions for staff? Councillor Cressy, Councillor Mihevc, Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll direct this to Mr. Raftis at SSHA. I want to drill down into shelter beds specifically here. So in the report on page 6, in terms of looking for new shelter spaces, so not drop-in sites. I'll put the drop-in program on one side. This is on shelter beds. So it noted that we identified, or you had identified 500 sites, and that you'd investigated 191. Can you walk us through, and how many are we on the path to securing? I mean, what's the roadblocks here from the 500 we identified to the 191 we investigated to how many are we have we secured or on the verge of securing for new sites?
Through the chair. So yes, we've done extensive work looking right across the entire city with our partners in real estate, the Chief Corporate Office, to identify sites. We have looked at 500. The reason that drops down to 191 right away is because many of them right off the hop wouldn't work. Either they're way too small or they just wouldn't fit specific criteria. And then you go down from there. So, issues with landlords not being interested in having that as an actual site, zoning, cost, those types of things. And we've actually arrived at 6 sites through that process. We did the same thing for the 24-hour drop-ins as well. And so when we came back in July and asked for $6 million to provide that low barrier service, we went through all of those locations. We met with many councillors who offered specific sites. And many of those sites, looking across the room, immediately, and even with personal intervention, would not work. The buildings were not repairable, all kinds of different issues with that.
So the 6 sites, So from the 500 to the 191 to the 6 sites we've identified, are those the sites that are identified in attachment 3? Is that, so are any of those 6 coming online soon?
So yes, if you look in, in 2016, we added, in terms of the total number of beds, it's about 1,400 over the last 2 years. Many of those, yes, are motel. Many of those are motel programs that are responding to the refugee family piece. In 2016, we added 119 beds. 2017, 279, and 2018, 171. So there is a lot of discussion about what was replacement, what is net new. In terms of that history, as I just go back and look at the data, we're showing incremental increases over those years. So I'm sure there was replacement and some net new. There is some incremental increase there.
So help me to understand, or all of us. So we know that we're not meeting our 90% occupancy targets. So where is the roadblock in getting these new sites open? Is there money in the budget, but we don't have the sites? Is that the roadblock? Because I believe we have the money, we just don't have the sites. Is that right?
So you have a number of sites that are opening. So if you look in Salvation Army Hope as an example, now that is a replacement site, but we have that site. The money is in the budget, and it is opening at the end of this year. 747 Warden, the Youth Link site, the money is in the budget. We have that site, it is opening up. The Birchmount site, the old site is about 59 beds. It's going to 100 beds at that new location. We do have that site. It is opening next year. 731 Runnymede, same thing. And same with EGAL. There's money in the budget and it is opening up. There is money in the budget for the George Street revitalization sites. The challenge has been securing sites for that project. So there's about $50 million associated with those 400 replacement beds. And so we still have to find sites for those ones. Now, we have a number of sites in play working with, other organizations in the city. And we're feeling confident that in 2018, we are going to secure a number of sites.
I guess what I'm trying to understand, so I understand the work being done on these sites. It seems to me that the issue is getting the sites open as opposed to the dollars to open them. Is that right? Because if the issue is getting the sites, is our criteria too stringent?
That's your last question.
How do we open more sites if we have the money? Is it the criteria? What do we need to be more creative? What can we do from your perspective?
So I believe we're doing everything possible. You have a large team from the city looking at this. This is not SSHA. This is a multidisciplinary team from many different organizations within the city. It is very challenging to find sites that are available, that are, of significant size. There's all kinds of sites around the city that are very small. It is very difficult to find sites that would fit within this criteria. Now, I might add, this year, we've done more than we have in many previous years. And the team is working as hard as we possibly can to bring on new sites. And there has been some expropriations to deal with this as well. So if you look out in Scarborough at Birkdale residents, so we had a challenge there, and the city moved to expropriate that site, and then a deal was made with that particular owner.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cressy. Councillor Mahavik, and then Councillor Ainsley.
Yes, I'm trying to get a hold of numbers, but I'll leave the big question to the end. But on page 9 of 20, where you have the different houses and the increases year to year, I'm really trying to get a handle on this. So in end of year 2017, you say 5,651 spaces. That includes how many spaces in the motels?
There are
For refugee-
approximately 900 spaces in.
900 there. Does that include the transitional housing beds referred to by one of the deputations, for
Yes.
example?
Yes.
They're not shelters, they're transitional housing.
Well, so the program model is different. So the organization has always considered them to be shelters.
Okay.
But the services and the length of stay theoretically should be different. So you're moving people into this specific type of shelter, providing a specific type of service with then moving them back out into the community.
I see, okay, so out of the cold, are you including out of the cold in that 5,651?
No.
No, are you including the drop-in beds, which is really a new current of drop-in programs?
No.
Okay, so then I'm a little bit stuck. So if we had 5,651 minus 900, that's 4,750, which is 500 more than last year at about the same time. 500 more, and then I go to page 17 of 20, and I see some of them are original. If you look at just the ones in 2017, it's been 60 new beds home first, 60 new beds, which is really half of what the original 124 were. Where are the other 400 beds?
So so there are, in 2016, so there's 14 at Scott Mission, 7 mixed adults at Homes First, 13 at Sojourn House, 25 at YMCA, 60 at Homes First Scarborough, 30 at Christie Ossington, 6 at Christie Refugee, 12 at Christie Ossington Lansdowne, 36 at Sojourn House, that was a temporary site, 60 at Salvation Army, Leslieville, 30 at Homes First on Kennedy Road.
Could we get that list?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, and those really are existing shelters where we basically found an extra room, or someone has found an extra room and allowed us to add beds, right? For the most part.
No, I would say that a number of them were new programs.
New programs. Okay, it would be
Some would be
helpful if we had an
some would-
attachment of what was additional, because it does get a bit confusing here. Okay, so here's the big question, is, for me anyway, is we've heard reports here that even with the, not counting the out of the cold beds, the drop-in beds, not counting the transitional, counting the transitional housing, that we are busting at the seams. Is that your assessment as well as staff?
So the occupancy is at 96%. The out of the cold programs are fully used. The 24-hour drop-ins, they're being used.
Fully?
I didn't look at the numbers today, but as they came on, there was clearly a difference with Peter Street, and people started to go to them right away. So they are being, I would say, fully used also.
So, without leading the witness, and you're a former EMS guy, that to me says we kind of got a little bit of that the analysis that many folks hear that this is a crisis is not inaccurate.
So laying out the facts as they are, when I look at the data hasn't changed much in the past couple of years, other than the number of beds continues to rise. We've added many more resources in the last couple of years. There's no question about that in my mind when I just look at the data and the programming. And the percentage of occupancy has kept pace with that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. That's helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Mahavik. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. So the questions I have, it's more around, I guess, attachment to and the local councillor and how the local councillor has been involved. And I speak from this, I guess, because, you know, I agree. I think that eventually every ward in this city is probably going to have a shelter or need a shelter. And I think trying to get what the communication strategy is for councillors to get ahead of this. So, because I have an issue in my ward, which I'm trying to deal with, where Homes First is looking at a piece of property in my ward, and I'm getting mixed communication from, there's a consultant, I get mixed numbers. How are we doing the outreach to councillors?
Through the chair. So a couple of ways. We're trying to get to the councillors early to give them early information and sit down and have a conversation to say, you know, how would this fit? Sometimes what happens is an existing shelter comes forward to the city and says, we need a new site. We have already found a site and we want to move forward on that. And we do our best to say, okay, hold on a second, let us connect in and follow a process. So if the city is opening up one of its own shelters, there is more space in there in terms of being able to do pre-planning and, you know, work that particular piece through. Sometimes when a replacement shelter comes up, the actual provider arrives at our door and says, you know, we've found a site already, we want to go forward with this. So we're trying to manage that.
Okay, and so you engage the local councillor, you hire a consultant to do community outreach and engage the community?
That's correct. We ideally would hire a third-party facilitator, have an engagement plan for the community that we would share with the local councillor, because there might be, the local councillor might say, well, don't do this, do that. You know, our community is a little bit different than this other one. And then, you know, maybe we adjust the communications plan and then we move forward from there.
Okay, and the communications plan involves, so the local stakeholders, and then in the case that, for example, in my ward with Home First would be a community meeting at large?
So we have, it depends on the local area. Sometimes councillors request for specific meetings. Sometimes the councillors would say, I would like you to meet with individual BIAs. Sometimes you would have specific community organizations come together. So we would tailor that to recommendations from the local councillor.
Okay, and then, sorry, going back to the size of the shelter, so we're trying to put a shelter in every ward, which I think is the goal, or, you know, to meet the capacity. How do you decide on the size of the shelter for that area? For example, the one that Homes First is looking at, it currently has 67 beds, and the one that's going into my area, I was told it was going up to 90 beds. How do you determine the numbers?
So through the chair, through the new engagement process with a third-party facilitator that was approved last year through council, or this year through council, the recommendation was to keep the shelters at no larger than 90 beds. Part of what would work depends on physical size of the building. So if a building would only take 80, then we wouldn't put more than 80 folks in there. Similarly, we wouldn't want to have another Seton House where you have 500 people. You know, you find a very large building, just because it could take 500, it's not a great program model for our clients. So we want to try and have, you know, no more than 90 clients in one site permanently.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. Other questions to staff? I just have a couple. Groups have come to me, and certainly it's been mentioned in the deputations, urging the City of Toronto to access the armories. Staff are reluctant to do so. Could you provide some clarity to what role the armories could play and why we're not going down that route?
So to the chair. So earlier on this year, we came forward to CDNR and then council with a plan to open up 5 individual low barrier locations across the city. That was approved. That was the approach that we were taking to provide those low barrier spaces. So that's what we did. We tried to find locations that were, had appropriate facilities and those types of things. And the Armory, is my understanding, I wasn't here at the time, but was used many years ago, was not an ideal facility for that. So we looked for 5 locations around the city where we could do that, and those are, 4 of them are opening, and the 5th one's opening in Parkdale in a couple of weeks. The reason why the 5th one didn't open on the same day was because one of our community groups that was going to run that had to back out actually the day of the announcement, and so we went forward to another trusted community partner, and they have agreed to run that, but it's taking them a couple of weeks to staff up.
The block buying of hotel rooms, is that exclusive to refugees, or can others access that program?
It's not exclusive to refugees, but it fits very, very well for families in terms of the program model. And most of the families that we are seeing are refugees. So I wouldn't say it's exclusive, but just in terms of how it has worked out, generally there's families in there. There are some singles. The hotels don't prefer to have singles, to be honest. So we're trying to manage all of the nuances within the system to provide as much service as we possibly can.
So there's wiggle room within that program to accommodate non-refugees, others.
I would say there's wiggle room.
The asylum seekers, the case of Montreal, a prime example where they were put in the Olympic Stadium. It's my understanding that the federal government has come to the table on that. I don't know whether that is correct or not. Maybe Mr. Brillinger can answer. Have they come to the table with the City of Toronto?
They have not come to the, we work with federal colleagues. There's been no specific assistance from the federal government. The context in Quebec is very different because the nature of the intergovernmental relationship between Canada and Quebec is very different. On the issue of immigration and settlement.
Well, the only difference I know is that Quebec would get the first right of refusal from asylum seekers or refugees coming from La Francophonie. I don't know of any other special status.
The financial arrangements between Canada and Quebec with respect to immigration and settlement are different.
So we're finding it increasingly difficult to access federal cash on this.
The federal funding is based on a 3-year rolling average in terms of settlement numbers. Ontario and Toronto specifically had seen its numbers decline over a period of time, so there was a lag with a reduction in funding. We're now on the upswing in terms of numbers and looking forward to a continued upswing in terms of financial support.
All right, I have other questions, but I think I'm out of time. Speakers. Councillor Cressy, Councillor Wong-Tam. Councillor Wong-Tam will go first.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would ask that the clerk put my motion on the screen. The first three specifically speak to the request for City Council asking the mayor to use his authority under the Municipal Code, Chapter 59, under the title of Emergency Management, declare the city's shelter system to be in emergency. We are seeing, and to open up as many facilities as possible to ensure that we can protect the health, the safety, and the well-being of the inhabitants, of those individuals affected by that emergency. And to do everything that they can, the mayor, to find the necessary funding to support the creation of additional temporary shelter facilities while we are in this declaration of emergency, to request the mayor to contact the federal government and to open up the Fort York Armory and the Moss Park Armory during this emergency declaration. Also to ask this General Manager of Shelter Support and Housing to reassess the 64 facilities and to re-examine them once again and to report back on the reasons for them not meeting the criteria, and then to re-examine those criteria and then report back on those new criteria. Also asking the city, the General Manager, to review housing opportunities or temporary shelter accommodations in city-run winter respites during that state of during the emergency declaration, and then also to have the General Manager review the opportunities for adding new and temporary shelter spaces in after-programming city-owned facilities, including community recreation centers during that period of emergency. I'm almost at a loss of words. But I can't be, because we don't have the luxury to be composed. We don't have the luxury to be patient anymore. In my community, where we do have a major housing crisis, and every single politician across this country has talked about this housing crisis. Every single politician in this building and the province has talked about the housing crisis, especially faced in Toronto. In the downtown communities of Toronto, we are seeing the housing crisis manifest itself in a crisis around the shelter facilities. And they're not separate. We can't talk about a housing crisis without talking about the crisis in shelters. And I can say with all honesty, based on everything that I have observed, aside from even what the deputants have said to us today, is that we are in this state of, we are in an emergency situation, which means that we have to respond accordingly. The drop-in facilities in the communities are full. That is not disputable. Everywhere I go, I'm being told they are full. The staff that run those facilities are stretched, and they're living with a lot of trauma as they're watching people become very ill or the facilities themselves become infected. They're also seeing people die on the streets. We are seeing the Out of the Cold program, which was supposed to be a temporary measure for a short period of time, which was going to be seasonal. They're at capacity, and they have appeared before us on numerous occasions now over the past couple of years, explaining to us what they're going through. So not only are we dealing with a labor crisis, because we're seeing good people burnt out, essentially. We are seeing volunteers stretched to capacity. We're seeing board members trying to do everything they can with the limited resources that they have in order for them to fill that gap. We're not meeting our shelter standards in many places. We are creating responses in a way that is trying to get to a solution, and I'm fearful that we're not doing it in a collaborative and comprehensive manner. What I'm seeing in my communities are people sleeping on the grates, which we've seen for a number of years now, but the volume and the magnitude of the problem has now come home to roost. We are seeing people in the laneways. I'm seeing people besides besides garbage dumpsters. I'm seeing folks in the parks. I'm seeing them under the bleachers. I'm seeing them at the university campus environment. I'm seeing them in the Eaton Center. I'm seeing them in every single public washroom. I'm seeing them in the library. I'm seeing them at Tim Hortons. I'm seeing them literally everywhere. And there is no way for us to deal with this situation unless we actually put all attention and resources to it in a way that's going to be concerted. People are going to die this winter. I think that we can logically assume that that is going to happen. It's going to be reasonable to assume that if you have this many people who are actually on the streets, street involved, sleeping in every single nook and cranny trying to stay warm, that they're not all going to make it. If we don't take this action and we don't ask the mayor to take this action, and he has the powers to do so, because I've looked it up and I was trying to figure out how does this Emergency Management Act, the power is there. The political power is there. We need to bring all those concerted efforts together to fix what we have as a problem today. We need 1,000 new shelter beds. That is granted. We need 400 of them immediately, and we can probably take the first step of trying to do what we should have done probably even several years ago before it's reached this critical stage and point. The business community that I work with, I would say, would largely agree with this. There aren't too many people who live in Toronto who's actually being able to see what they see on Bay Street around the edges of City Hall who can actually refute this. I don't think it's actually, I don't think it's debatable.
You could wrap up, that'd be
I'll
great.
just conclude. Oftentimes, we don't know what to do. Individuals, residents in the city don't know what to do when they see someone homeless. They walk over them, they walk past them, they avert their eyes, they don't know what to do. They're expecting us to take leadership, they're expecting this building to lead, and that's what I hope the mayor will do by declaring that emergency. Thank you.
So normally I would move motions to complete the item, but we are on a strict timeline. I'm hoping that councillors from the committee will come out into the hallway and help with the City Hall launch of My Toronto. It was a calendar photography program to help homelessness, to bring awareness of homelessness. So in light of the topic that we're on, I would hope committee members and visiting councillors would come and join us. I would suggest that, and there might even be questions for the mover, which we didn't even get to that. I would suggest we adjourn so that recess so we can set up outside and then come back at 1:30 and finish up. Unless there are objections. There's 3 minutes to go. Two motions? Well, I don't think we can finish the item, but if you'd like to are we? Well, if you think you can finish in 2 minutes, go ahead.
So I'll take 2 minutes. I have two motions, if they can be put on the screen. One motion has to do with a formal call from the city to the province related to LHINs in staffing, health service staffing within our shelter system, and the other has to do with expediting the review of the 24-hour referral center for families. And Councillor Wong Tam has moved motions which I will be supporting, so I don't see the need to move others. I'll speak very quickly within 2 minutes. I want to thank those on the front lines who spoke here today for their courage and compassion, and equally I want to thank our staff in shelter support and housing administration who in a political environment, in my opinion, has not given you all the tools and resources you need. You continue to work under those circumstances to the best that you can, and I want to thank you for that hard work. I think what a proper supported system looks like is what one deputant I want to acknowledge, Derek George, talked about, which was a system that, yes, has housing and a variety of forms of housing, but also the supports needed for people who are in those different forms of housing. And there is not one silver bullet, but it seems that on every level of that tier, we are behind. That our drop-in system, despite being expanded, is at capacity. That our shelter system, despite our attempts and our funds to open new shelters, we are still over capacity. That our transitional housing and affordable housing system is way over capacity. So on that measure, at every level, we are at a crisis. And so it seems to me that notwithstanding the incredible and tireless work of our staff and the life-saving work of our staff, the status quo is not working. That as we add beds, the demand increases and does not shrink. And that too many are dying and too many are waiting, and thus we have to be more creative. Perhaps we have to be less stringent with our own criteria in the short term. And that is up to political leadership to make happen. That if we recognize the urgency and the desire and need to find spaces both now and in the future, and to increase the health and service supports to wrap around there, then we as a political body have to give staff the ability to be more creative and to take those necessary steps. Our staff, just like our frontline workers, are run off their feet. And too many are dealing with their own trauma in the community and in our staff of being run off their feet. But it is time for our political leaders to step up because the status quo is not working, it's failing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cressy. We will recess to, we have to go. There are people waiting out there for us. We'll reconvene at 1:30. I hope members of the committee will come join with the launch. And members of the public are also welcome.